Hey guys, we're going to do a quick what we call a debrief, where we're going to go back and review some things from the draft and some portions of our games where maybe we could have done something differently, or maybe we made a mistake, or there's just something interesting that we want to talk about. We were rushed in parts, especially during the drafting section, because we were using the beta client, which is a little slow and kind of freezes up a little bit in places. And we didn't quite have time to explain some things, or maybe we made a mistake because we didn't see something that maybe we should have.
Boy, did we.
And we did kind of lose the second round on. Well, we did lose it on time, but the beta client was a little bit slow and probably cost us that game. We also could have played faster as well, obviously, and part of that was just due to the type of deck that we were playing, being partially a control deck with counter spells and activated abilities to do on their turn. And that's just a general thing about playing on MTGO, is aggro decks have a certain kind of advantage just on time when you can just F6 through their turn all the time because you never have any reactions, and sometimes you get caught out playing something of a control deck. We know a lot of people consider Izzet to be a bad guild, bad color combination, bad archetype, what have you, in Return to Ravnica draft, but sometimes it can actually be quite powerful, and we had a pretty good Izzet deck, not the best that we've ever had, but it certainly could have gone 3-0. Obviously, we went 2-1 and lost, but didn't actually lose the match we lost. We didn't actually lose a game, and we were about to win it right there. So we easily could have gone 3-0 in this draft. I will mention as well, we do Swiss drafts because we want to make sure that we always have a full set of videos. A lot of people play in the single eliminations or the 8-4 queues, and some people believe that the competition is weaker or stronger in some of the queues, and that may be to some extent. For us, though, the difference is fairly marginal, and it's more important for us to have the full set of videos for you guys to be able to watch. So please, we don't need in the comment section like, oh, well, we were just playing Swiss, so these people sucked. They did make some mistakes. We were definitely not playing against top competition, but despite all that,
we ourselves are not top competition.
Well, we're pretty good. We're over 1,800 limited rating on MTGO, which is, pretty good. But we're not, pro tour kind of guys. But despite that, we think we still have interesting points of view, and that you can still learn something from our videos. So, the point I was trying to get at is, despite the fact that our competition was maybe not the best competition, our Izzet deck was still pretty good, and this can work at higher levels of competition. So, because we've heard some pros say, in their videos that, Izzet just sucks and it's never any good, and that's generally not true. So there's a few different ways you can go with Izzet, and you can even, obviously go with a third color. You can splash black and go Grixis, or you can splash white and kind of play, America colors. And, there's a few other things. And in this draft specifically, we had a shot at a fair number of good white cards or blue-white cards, and we could have definitely gone with red, white, and blue. However, statistically, it's been shown, and, it should be pretty obvious, but, people have done the analysis statistically, that the two-color decks do better than three-color decks, just mana consistency. And so every time we had an opportunity to grab, a good white card or a good blue-white card, we, generally speaking, had a really solid card that was in our colors, just staying strictly blue-red. So we didn't go with the three colors, but you certainly could have. It would have been reasonable to do so. And so we'll get to that here in a sec. So let's take a look at one of the picks that we didn't get a chance to talk. So here in Pack 2 for Pick 1, we talked a fair amount about opening the Wayfaring Temple and the interactions with the Grove of the Guardians that we saw past back in Pack 1. And we wound up taking the Annihilating Fire here, which was a very good pick and it worked very well. We wound up having 3 Annihilating Fires, and it was all very solid. The Stab Wounds is also obviously one of the best cards, one of the best, probably the best common for this format, and if you want to go Grixis, playing that is a perfectly valid option.
And it opens you up for Ultimate Price and Assassin's Strike.
It opens up a lot of things, and obviously there's a Deviant Glee right here as well, and we think that more often, if you wind up Grixis, you're probably more likely to be Rakdos splashing blue than you are to be Izzet splashing black.
Yeah.
Just the way it tends to play out. The Deviant Glee, can be really good, but more often in a Rakdos deck. So the other option is there is a Liev Sky Knight, which is the picture actually never fully loads in this pack, but you can see the name there at the top, third one over from the left. And Liev Sky Knight is also, can be really, really powerful for getting out to a fast start, being a 3-power flyer, on an early turn.
And especially saberable.
Yeah, there's a Civic Saber here in this pack, and we do wind up with a Civic Saber later, and that can
I'm not sure if it's this one, but
Yeah, we're not sure if it's actually this one that wheels back, but we get one later on, and that can work out very well. The thing is, and it's something that has detain like this, it doesn't actually matter if you play it early or if you use it late for the detain ability, because if you're just splashing, one of the things about splashing is that oftentimes it's not good for things you want to play early in the game. You don't splash for something you want to play on turn 2 because you don't have enough lands or mana sources that provide that color to reliably get them early. So if you're just splashing a couple of cards, you want it for things you're going to be playing later. So if you do pull the blue and the white and play this on turn 3, it's fine. And if you don't play it until turn 6, that's actually generally also fine. So that makes it a very reasonable candidate for splashing. And as it turns out, we see a number of other good blue-white or white cards go, and so winding up in an America shell would have actually worked out okay. So we're going to skip ahead now to another one of the choices. All right, so in this pack, we didn't get a lot of time, and we wound up taking the Annihilating Fire, and it's our second Annihilating Fire, and obviously...
And we missed something big. I'll give you guys a few seconds. Do you see it? It smashed our face in. Okay. Yes, there it is.
Yeah, with only a few seconds to pick our card because the client took so long to load, we didn't even see the Deadbridge Goliath in this pack. Like, we had 10 seconds or whatever. Well, there's 15 seconds on the clock here, and before this, the pictures hadn't even loaded properly, and so we were scanning to see stuff for our deck, and we didn't have really time to analyze. And in this pack, we like to, as we mentioned earlier, we like to hate draft fairly aggressively, and you have to think a little bit about, is a card going to make my deck enough better than a card that we're passing is going to make us lose? There's a balance you have to strike there, and Deadbridge Goliath is one of those cards in Limited that will just...
It's worth not ever facing it.
Yeah, because it's oftentimes just you can't deal with it, especially the guy who winds up playing it against us. He has the... he plays the Mana Bloom, which is generally terrible, but he accelerates into like a turn 3 Deadbridge Goliath or something like that.
Oh, he started off using the Mana Bloom great, and then finished off not using it so great.
Well, just in general, it's not a card you generally want to play in a Limited, but he used it. And if you get any acceleration and you run into a turn 3 Deadbridge Goliath, there's a lot of times you just can't do anything. It's really, really powerful.
You can lose. You can lose.
Well, yeah, you can lose. And basically, and the thing is, it's generally hard to answer. Here at this point in its Pack 2, Pick 2, we don't have here any explosive impacts or other good ways of dealing with a Deadbridge Goliath. And so that's another thing about hate drafting is you have to think about, do you have cards in your deck that will answer a Deadbridge that will answer the card that you're passing. So like about the only thing that we have to really deal with the Deadbridge Goliath is trying to trade it off with our Bloodfray Giant, but our Bloodfray Giant can't block and trade because it only trades when he is unleashed, and so that's awkward. And our Niv Mizzet will trade with it, and our Niv Mizzet is a 6-drop, and trading Niv Mizzet for a Deadbridge Goliath is obviously not...
After you've already taken 10.
Yeah, it's generally not where you want to be. So in this case, Annihilating Fire is definitely good for our deck. We already have an Annihilating Fire, and so it's probably in this case better for us to hate draft the Deadbridge Goliath and keep it out of the hands of the other players. The other thing I believe we talked about a little bit in the original video is the Teleportal, and so
surprise, I win.
Yeah, it's a great card, and it has uses. And within the Izzet colors, you actually have a few different options. You can play kind of a more aggro style of Izzet, and you can play a more controlling style of Izzet. And there's some different options even within those. The Teleportal is generally better in a more aggro version of Izzet. So one of the things that you generally can do is you borrow cards from Rakdos and you borrow cards from Azorius. So a lot of the cards you wind up playing are some of the Unleashed guys that are mono red. So the Chainwalker, the Gorehouse Chainwalker, and Splatter Thug, and as you saw, we have the Bloodfray Giant and some other things. On the more controlling side, you can get some Azorius cards, some of the Inaction, Injunction, and I don't have another good example off the top of my head, but
a bad example, Crosstown Courier. Just
sure.
To get power down there.
Sure. To make the aggro Izzet deck work, and the aggro Izzet deck can be actually much better than the Rakdos aggro decks in a lot of cases
because it has control.
Because you have some controlling elements, and also you can have guys that can block. You have the Unleashed guys, but you can also have Frostburn Weirds and Void Wielders and some other guys who can effectively block as well. One of the best cards for the aggro Izzet decks is the Pursuit of Flight, which we never actually pick up because Pursuit of Flight is extremely powerful on Frostburn Weirds, and it's also good with a number of the other kind of aggro cards that we wind up passing.
Cobble Brutes.
Yeah, it's especially effective with Cobble Brutes. And so you hear us in the commentary mention that some of these, like Tenement Crasher, who's on, who's available here, and Cobble Brutes, which we see several times, are actually valid choices or can be quite good. And a lot of you might be thinking, oh, those cards suck. You never really want to play those. A lot of you probably draft them and don't put them in your deck because they're kind of conditional. They are situational. They get better they're better in aggro Izzet decks than they probably are in Rakdos aggro decks, because the Izzet decks have better ways to take advantage of them. And Teleportal is an example of one of the ways that you can make something like a Cobble Brute be really good. When you drop the turn 4 Cobble Brute and then you overload Teleportal on turn 5 for the win, which this can actually happen if you've been kind of curving out and getting a bunch of damage in the early turns. So I also wanted to mention as well that if you were doing the America colored version, picking up the Trostani's Judgment, you could actually be more willing to pass the Deadbridge Goliath if you're picking up the Trostani's Judgment, because then you know that you have answers for the Deadbridge Goliath in your deck. Having the Exile card to prevent them from getting the Scavenge ability, that changes your analysis on how much you're afraid of the other card just beating your face in.
Yeah, Scavenge goes away as a threat when you're playing Trostani's Judgment and Dramatic Rescue and Void Wielder.
Yeah, some of this kind of stuff. And obviously the Annihilating Fire, does, help as well, as you see in the games where we get rid of some Dreg Manglers and whatnot with the Annihilating Fire. So anything else you want to add here?
No.
All right, we'll go to the next. And here we get to pack 3, our first pick. We open, complete crap rare, and we wind up picking Annihilating Fire again for our third Annihilating Fire, which is, again, quite good. But there's a few other, good cards, and if you're splashing a third color of very reasonable things, if we'd taken the Stab Wound in the earlier choice that we showed you, going Grixis, then obviously picking up the second Stab Wound, having splashing black for 2 Stab Wounds is certainly very reasonable, and if we wound up with 2 Stab Wounds, we would certainly probably wind up trying to play them. And if we had known before that we were going to see a second Stab Wound later, right, we would have grabbed the first one to have, 2 of them.
How profound, wizard.
Yeah, if you can see the future, then it helps you plan better for your... And once again, we wind up another one of the really good cards for just Azorius in general, and the America kind of deck. The Skymark Rock is just a really solid card. Being a 3/3 flyer for 4 is great, and then that ability to just tempo people out, and it wipes out a bunch of tokens. Some of the 1 toughness and especially the 2/2 Knight tokens with Vigilance.
Knights and the Birds.
Yeah,
and Goblins.
Yeah, and Goblins, which we rarely see, but yeah, and just being able to tempo people out. So again, if you're going with a little bit more of an aggro style deck, it doesn't actually tend to be quite so good in a controlling decks, because you have to attack with it to get its ability. And a lot of times the more controlling decks, they want to be able to block, and so it can wind up being a little bit awkward. So I also mentioned here in this pack we see a cancel here, and people, a lot of drafters, I think, don't appreciate the power of counterspells in general in drafts, and because it is situational. And
counterspells in the correct type and number.
Yeah, so you need the right kinds of counterspells, and it needs to be in the right type of deck. So as you saw in our games, we wound up main decking 3 counterspells, and we sideboarded in a 4th sometimes, just depending on what we were going up against. And you saw they were extremely effective. Obviously, and this might seem a little counterintuitive, but in a lot of cases, they're actually very, very good in the aggro decks, where you can put down early threats and hit them and force them to play stuff into your counterspells, or where you can use
answer or die.
Yeah,
answer or die. Answer or die.
When something like Essence Backlash is obviously just hugely punishing when you go with a turn 2 Frostburn Weird, or even better, Frostburn Weird is a little awkward with keeping mana up for counterspells. But if you get the Chainwalkers, which we didn't have, and you can just be attacking with a Chainwalker from turn 2, and you're sitting on an Essence Backlash, and they have to play something to effectively fight it, and then they just wind up taking 3 or 4 to the face off the Essence Backlash, and the game can just end on turn 4 when you Essence Backlash a guy, because they can never catch up. And also the Dispel for kind of preventing combat. You can play a lot more aggressively. You can attack into things. Oftentimes, something that can interfere with an aggro deck is the other guy has a Hussar Patrol, or a creature with flash. You attack with a Chainwalker and they flash into Hussar Patrol, and you just lose your Chainwalker. And so being able to sit back with in essence Backlash lets you be a lot more aggressive. And the same thing with the spell, because you can attack into situations where you're like, oh, they're going to block and try and pump.
Lots of pump spells are instants.
Yes, and so you actually saw us try and, there was a couple of times during the games where we do just that, where it's like we know that we have Dispel, and so we can mess up their combat tricks and enable us to be a little bit more aggressive in certain places. And we also wind up with an Is It Charm, which has a little bit more utility because you can use it in a few different ways. But so at any rate, the overall point being you have to know how to use the counterspells correctly. You can't play a draw go kind of deck in draft. You can't.
You'll lose to time.
Not only will you lose to time.
Game 2.
Yeah, but you generally can't get enough counterspells. And you can't keep the board clear enough. There's, you can't, because you can't get the right mix of stuff to really make Drago work with sweepers and the card draw and the card advantage and such that you need to really make those kind of decks work. It's more about having the correctly timed counterspell. So we just wanted to point that out. All right, I think on to the next pick. And here, a little bit further down the line, we actually see a Hussar Patrol. And if you've been going for the America colors, then he can be a great pickup, for surprising those Gorehouse Chainwalkers. And we also wanted to point out, we mentioned in the initial draft video that Ethereal Armor can be really, really strong. And so here in this pack, we actually see both the Ethereal Armor and the Knightly Valor, which is one of the best combinations. Both of them are solidly playable on their own, even without any...
Ethereal Armor more so than Knightly Valor, but yeah.
Yeah, Knightly Valor is one of the... widely considered to be one of the best, one of the best commons, in the set. And Ethereal Armor works best when you have, either the hexproof guy, like the Rubbleback Rhino, or you have a fencing ace. Other guys who can multiply its effect or whatever is obviously the best case. But
First Strike really helps shut down Rakdos aggro decks.
Yes, it does. And the +2/+2 in Vigilance. The Knightly Valor is, oftentimes, one of the things that makes a Concordia Pegasus actually,
annoying.
Yeah. But anyway, so here they're in the same pack, and because they're independently playable on their own, you can pick up the Ethereal Armor and then get Knightly Valors or Security Blockades or Arrest or a few other things. Some people forget that, it interacts with things, enchantments that you play on your opponent's creatures. So you can play an Arrest, and it will still... get your Ethereal Armor to help pump you up, So, and on this pick, in the initial draft, Robert comments that the Tenement Crasher and Cobble Brute could both be really good for our deck. We wind up taking the Thought Flare, which was better for the deck that we actually had, and some of you might have been thinking again, these are terrible cards. So I wanted to let Robert expound a bit more.
You hurt me, Gus. I didn't say they would be good for the deck that we have. I said they would be good for the deck that we could have had.
Yes.
If we had been going more aggro, more Big Red is a viable play. You just, everybody ignores the Cobble Brute, so you end up with 3 or 4 of them, and it becomes turn 4, Cobble Brute, turn 5, Cobble Brute, turn 6, Cobble Brute, turn 7. You still have creatures on the board? Cobble Brute!
Yeah. And in particular, we didn't get some of the other cards that, go really, really well with it. Earlier, we passed not the Thought Flare, but the Teleporter, we passed that.
Yeah.
And we also passed the... no, we never actually saw a Pursuit of Flight.
Nope. Not one.
So, just in particular, the Pursuit of Flight works really well with the Cobble Brute. There's a lot of decks that just wind up... They just flat out lose to Cobble Brute with the Pursuit of Flight. The
Crowworm was always bad because he didn't have any abilities. But hey, a Crowworm that you can jump sounds good to me.
Yeah, 7/4 flying on turn 5 can... it'll end the game really fast if they don't have any answers for it. So... All right, and one more thing we wanted to talk about some interactions on. So we brought it back to actually an earlier pick. This is back in pick 1, where we pick up an Is It Static Caster. An Is It Static Caster is always pretty good on his own. Some people don't like him, but he's got a lot of versatility. And so a lot of people understand that you can use ping type effects to trade up in combat. And obviously you can wipe out a lot of X1s. But in Is It deck specifically... there's a number of interactions that can make it even better. In several cases when we go to sideboard, Robert and I talk a little bit about whether or not we want to bring in Electrickery. We never actually talk about during any of the videos that Electrickery is actually much better in this deck because we have Is It Static Caster, being able to wipe out all the X1s and X2s.
With the same name.
Yeah, with the same name, it works it can be extremely powerful, and obviously again for being able to trade up, you can getting up to 2 damage, for trading up your guys can be extremely powerful.
Or even X3s if you copy the Electricity, which
yes, and then specifically the very next pick that comes after this is actually we wind up picking up the Nivix Guildmage, which winds up doing a lot of work for us. And so actually, hold on, we're going to skip ahead to that. The Nivix Guildmage, I think a lot of people consider it to be one of the worst guild mages, but we actually have in our games some games where we actually get to see why this guy can actually be really powerful. He is, again, like so many things, very situational. Being able to copy an instant or sorcery is obviously much better when you have things that are cheap, or when you have games that go really long. So he is particularly good at copying something like Electricity, and he's also very good at copying something like Inaction Injunction, which we don't wind up getting any of. But having both the Nivix Guildmage and the Is It Static Caster can make the Electricity be much, much better than it is under normal circumstances. It's a fine sideboard card, against the right kinds of decks, but this deck can make Electricity really shine in ways that it doesn't normally.
Something that would have helped our Guildmage out a lot would have been some Goblin Electromancers, and I'm sure some of you were sitting there screaming at your monitors that why we didn't pick them up, but Goblin Electromancers don't do any good if you don't have any spells to play cheaper with them. And a lot of times what we took was something that we needed to cast.
Yeah, it's getting the right balance of guys. It's kind of like with Augur of Bolus or even Delver's Secrets. Having the right balance of guys and spells. In your deck. You need spells that you want to copy. But then you also have to have the guys and the Goblin Electromancer. He's a 2 for 2. He's not really helping your board if you don't have a lot of spells you're getting for cheaper. Where I like the Electromancer is actually generally with X spells and like overload spells. If you wind up with things like Street Spasm or Mizium Mortars or a Cyclonic Rift, some of those things, or especially like we don't wind up with any explosive impacts, which is one of the really good cards for the Izzet deck. So letting you cast the really expensive stuff a little bit earlier is where he shines. In our deck, we have a number of spells, but they're not the super expensive ones. The Goblin Electromancer really helps.
So they wouldn't have helped us as much as we would have hoped had we actually picked them up.
Yeah, and so then also the looting ability and the fact that you can actually do it multiple times per turn is really
tap symbol.
Yeah, it's really, really huge. And you see in the round 2 where we actually run out of time,
we almost killed ourselves.
Yeah, we're actually going to revisit that here in a little bit. We draw through a lot of cards, and we go through like 3 or 4 lands in a row at one point. We're able to just kind of like loot them all away. It can be a really big deal. So basically, we're just trying to say, in the right deck, it can be really good. So
it's perfect for endgame. Don't be afraid to throw them away early, though, if you're going to die.
Yeah, so don't just pass them blindly thinking like, oh, like this card sucks. It does have real uses, and it can in fact help you win games that you otherwise would not. All right, so we're gonna be back in a sec here. We're just gonna pause. So for you, no time will elapse. We're gonna go find some game states we want to talk about. All right.